Evening. I'd like to welcome you and call to order the February 27th Port Orchard City Council regular meeting. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're missing Mr. Clausen tonight, so we're going to delay that photograph at least another 2 weeks. So we're to the approval of the agenda, and I think there's going to be a couple of additions. Mr. Cacciardi?
Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to add to the consent agenda under 4D the excusal of Mr. Clausen for personal reasons.
Motion and a second to add Mr. Clausen to the consent agenda as sub 4D. Any discussion of that? All in favor of adding that item, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the item has been added. Councilmember Ashby, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I would like to add under business items, it would be 7. Oh, I have to go through the alphabet. The one after H. I, okay. The discussion of an engineering tech position.
Motion to add 7I in the engineering tech position.
Second.
And a second by Mr. Diener. Discussion of adding that item. Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, item 7I has been added to tonight's agenda. Any other additions or subtractions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as amended. Any further discussion of the agenda this evening? All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda has been approved for this evening. We are to our first citizen comment period, which is for items on the agenda this evening. Is anyone wishing to address the council at this point? We have another period at the end of the meeting for items not on the agenda. All right, we'll close the first citizen comment period. We're to our consent agenda. A motion for that?
Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
As amended.
As amended.
Second.
Motion a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. We have no presentations, we have no public hearings, and we are to our first business item, which is business item A, adoption of an ordinance adopting a new Port Orchard Municipal Code, Chapter 20.127, Design Standards, repealing ordinance number 1479, and amending chapters 20.12, definitions 20.38, overlay districts, and 20.100, development standard guidelines. Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Members of council, I am excited to present to you tonight our final ordinance.
Your
for...
mic's picking you up there.
Get a little bit closer here.
There you go.
I'm excited to present to you tonight the final draft ordinance adopting architectural and site planning design standards. This item was brought to you at work study last week, and there were 3 corrections that were noted in that meeting, one of which was emailed in and discussed that came from Councilmember Diener, and then 2 other amendments to the regulations from what you previously saw. This set of design standards deals with multifamily and non-residential development. If you remember, in June of last year, we did adopt single-family design standards at that time, but we had to hire a consultant to help us with the non-residential and multifamily standards. The changes that have been made to the ordinance since you saw it last week include changing the mixed storefront or the mixed street designation to varied, so it's a change in terminology. We realized that there were 4 sections of the Tremont Overlay District that needed to be struck through that were in the landscape code. We had only removed them from the Overlay District chapter, and so there's 4 additional sections of the Tremont District that are being deleted. And then, as I mentioned, Councilmember Diener had requested some clarifications about whether public works standards or the design standards would supersede one another, and so we added language dealing with that with regard to driveways entering a development site. So with that said, the staff recommendation is to approve the ordinance as presented. This comes with a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and all of the required steps with Department of Commerce notification and SEPA have been complete. And so staff is recommending approval. Thank you.
And just for clarification, there was some language changes, part of downtown in the wings, and there was an email that went out, some email dialogue and some draft language that Carrie recommended. Did that also was incorporated in this, I believe, too?
Yes, I thought that was part of what I discussed here, but unless I'm forgetting something.
Was it related to financial institutions in the?
Oh, yes, thank you. That's correct. At the council meeting, Councilmember Ashby had suggested some language. It was something that it was a section that we were amending, but we hadn't proposed to touch that particular section, and it clearly allows for, except between Frederick and Harrison, it allows financial institutions within the central downtown overlay district on lots abutting Bay Street, which it had not previously.
Okay.
And so that was another add-on kind of at the last minute.
Yes. Mr. Diener?
I guess I'll make a motion first. Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt an ordinance that includes the text revisions to ordinance 019-09, keeping the city in compliance with its, I got the wrong one. Sorry, I got my packet mixed up. So I move to adopt an ordinance adopting the design standards, repealing ordinance 1479, and amending multiple chapters within Title 20 as presented.
Second?
A motion and a second. As the motion maker, would you like to start the discussion?
Sure, so I just wanted some clarification on what we just talked about. It was not only to allow those uses outside or on the wings, but also to allow them on the first floor, if I read that correctly.
Yes.
Okay, all
They're
right.
allowed outright in the
Outright,
wings.
right.
And on the second floor, those uses would be allowed, professional uses in the core on the second floor.
Right.
Other questions? Yes.
I don't have a
Councilmember Lucarelli?
I don't have a question, but I wanted to let the rest of the council know that I did view the study session in its entirety because I felt it was so necessary to be able to have that information for tonight. So I was basically part of your discussion, though I wasn't there.
Other questions or comments?
No, I just want to thank the staff for changing the word mixed to varied. That helped me.
Semantics.
It was semantics, that's right. And I know we talked about this at length at work study, but, you know, that meeting isn't televised the way this one is. And, you know, this is a body of work that's been going on for, 6 or more months. And, with assistance from, a committee, assistance committee, the planning commission, and it all started with us going on that tour of those other communities. So I commend Mr. Bond and his staff for this body of work, and I think it's going to serve our community well.
Agree.
So with that, Mr. Diener?
Well, I just also wanted to compliment staff for moving this along rather quickly. We had a good firm that we worked with, but I also think that it was done at a very well accelerated pace, but it also didn't preclude any public involvement. So hats off to staff and the council for their work on this.
Okay, yes, Councilmember
One other
Lucarelli?
comment. I also like the opportunity to be able to speak to this, to the design standards at another time down the road and tweak it if need be. I thought that was an excellent build-in.
That's the next item is amending that design review board, yes. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, you'll be voting on adopting an ordinance repealing adopting a new Port Orchard Municipal Code, chapters 20.12 design standards. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, they're approved. We are to our second item, 7B, adoption of an ordinance amending Port Orchard Municipal Code 2.79 Design Review Board. Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you. This is a continuation of the previous agenda item. We are unable to amend two separate titles of the code within the same ordinance, and so when this was presented at work study, the amendment to Chapter 2.78 Design Review Board was part of the original ordinance, and so they've been broken into two pieces. So this is just an ordinance establishing or amending the Design Review Board chapter to follow the process described in the previously adopted ordinance. And I think as Councilmember Lucarelli mentioned, the Design Review Board's role is being expanded a little bit because we're going to ask them once a year to evaluate projects that have been constructed in the city under these new design standards and to provide recommendations for any changes that they feel are needed to either do because they don't consider everything that needs to be considered or because we have an outcome with a project that is not well received. And so I think that'll be good at least to get them meeting so that even though they don't review a whole lot of projects now, and they probably won't review a whole lot of projects in the future, at least they'll meet, get to know one another, and get to talk about design issues, and we may even want to refer other issues to them in the future for more of a aesthetic recommendation for issues that deal with aesthetics more so than policy.
One other note, change I noticed, which I think is a positive, is that previously and this is the only body that it was that case, there was term limits on the Design Review Board. None of our other bodies have that. And sometimes it's challenging to find volunteers to serve on boards. And if you got somebody good, all of a sudden you lose them over those, the terming out is probably unnecessary. Anybody that's volunteering their time, I think we should, accept their gracious service and be thankful for it. So I was happy to see that change. Is there a motion? Councilmember Lucarelli?
I move to adopt an ordinance adopting the amendments to POMC Chapter 2.78 as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second by Councilmember Cacciardi. Further discussion of this item? Yes, Mr. Diener?
Just a quick question. How fully staffed is this board today?
Fully staffed.
It's fully staffed, okay.
Yeah. I just had to replace somebody this year that had termed out after 2 terms, and I don't know that they maybe saw one project in those 8 years. So
Yeah.
it's not like we're using them a lot. So hopefully we'll change that. Other questions? Okay, you'll be voting on adoption of an ordinance amending Port Orchard Municipal Code, Chapter 2.79, Design Review Board. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are to 7C, adoption of a resolution approving the conversion from GAAP to cash. Mr. Crocker.
Mayor, council members, thank you. For the record, Noah Crocker, Finance Director for the City of Port Orchard. The resolution tonight reflects the Finance Department's recommendation to move from GAAP basis accounting to cash basis accounting. By way of history and background, we've discussed this change at the Finance Committee before bringing it to the full council at our most recent study session. GAAP accounting is a more complex and time-consuming method of reporting, which adds little value to the city. GAAP accounting takes significant time and resources to implement and are increasing each year with additional staff training time, auditing costs, and additional requirements. The State Auditor's Office has prescribed and authorized reporting requirements through Budgeting, Accounting, and Reporting Systems, BARS, manual for both GAAP basis accounting as well as cash basis for accounting. Cash basis reporting will simplify the annual reporting process, thereby significantly reducing the staff time required for preparation of the annual financial report and creating additional efficiencies. The recommendation, the Finance Department recommends converting to cash basis of accounting to increase efficiencies of the city's accounting system and the annual audit process.
Councilmember Ashby?
Yes, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the Finance Department to convert to cash basis of accounting for fiscal year 2018.
Second.
Councilmember Cacciardi seconded the motion. Discussion of this item? Hearing none, you'll be voting on adoption of a resolution approving the conversion from GAAP to a cash counting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are to our council meeting minutes of February 13th. Motion to approve. And And we won't have any extensions because Mr. Clausen is absent from tonight and missed that meeting, so.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve the minutes of February 13th as presented.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Lucarelli. Discussion of the minutes. Any amendments? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the February 13, 2018 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We are to 7E, a motion directing the mayor to pursue the Opportunity Zone program. Mr. Bond.
I forgot that this one was on the agenda. So the mayor and I were informed of a program that is administered, it was part of the 2018 tax bill that passed, and it's called the Opportunity Zone program, and it is a tax benefit program to developers who develop in certain distressed or underutilized areas nationally. And so it's being administered by the Department of Commerce, and is they don't even have an application process for this program yet, and so cities are rapidly getting their thoughts together on submitting letters to participate in the program. And so in your packet, there's a map that shows the areas of Port Orchard that are potentially able to be included. My understanding is that only 25% of the census blocks within the state are eligible for participation. And so if we want to participate, we could submit one or both of the two eligible zones in the city, but keeping in mind that there's a need to prioritize the two, which one we'd like to see develop. And knowing what we've put together in terms of the mixed-use pilot program downtown, I think we've taken some pretty strong steps towards revitalizing downtown, which is in the distressed census block. We also have passed the residential tax abatement ordinance, and so that's a second step that I think illustrates the city's commitment to this area. And so our thought is that by sending a letter requesting that the Department of Commerce include us in this program, because I think the need to let them know that we want to participate is sooner than they're actually going to have an application process in place, and so they're potentially going to be accepting jurisdictions to participate in this. And the program essentially affects the capital gains taxes that developers would be paying on projects through their federal tax obligations. So this is another tool to help incentivize development in parts of the city. Essentially what we would have to do is if council would like to participate, we are going to draft a letter making our case for inclusion, and I think we would prioritize the census tract that includes downtown, and say that we would also like to be considered in the eastern census tract, but it's not as high a priority as our downtown, and then and make the case, and also reach out to others to write letters of support for this. So we're asking for council to authorize the mayor to submit that request to the Department of Commerce.
So ideally, I would have taken this to the work study, but this has come on very quickly, and Commerce's deadline to make a decision is coming upon us very quickly. I think really what we're going to do, if there's really no defined process for this, we're just making sure that Commerce is aware that we want to be included in this, and that 25% of the eligible census tracts is a number that's slightly more than the number of counties in the state. And I'm hearing secondhand that most likely each county in the state will get one census tract. So if we fine tune our request to this one census tract is probably our best bet, and that's kind of the tract we're taking. We'll secondarily ask that part of that other census tract, which is the portion across Blackjack Creek, which is the West Bay Center and that complex just south of KFC, we'd like that to get included too, but more importantly, the census tract downtown is our number one ask in this. So we'll see what Commerce does for it. Bremerton's approach is they're asking for 4 census tracts to be included in their downtown, and I don't know that that's realistic or not. So hopefully more than one tract in Kitsap County gets selected, and, because I'd like to see them benefit from this too. But primarily, I'm looking out for our interests and making sure that we get included in this, so. That's the background. So it's really just, you guys, we want to have a resolution on record to go with the letter we're submitting to Commerce that the city council supports this opportunity zones proposal.
I just have a question. The map that we have, are those, is that whole red one census tract? And the
Yes.
yellow is one census tract?
Yes, correct.
Okay, a lot of the yellow is outside of the city.
Correct.
So, and when I look at this, it looks to me like West Bay's in there, and you're thinking it's not?
It's, the tip of it's not, I don't believe, when we.
Okay.
No, West Bay is not in there. It's,
It looks-
Titus is in, but the other side of Blackjack Creek, there's.
Blackjack Creek is
Okay.
the divider.
Okay,
So we'd like to get just across there if we can,
Okay.
but we won't,
it's not even in the yellow.
Yeah, it's not in the yellow. West Bay is not eligible at all, but
Eligible.
the shopping center just next to KFC on the other side of Maple is in
Is.
the
Is
yellow
in.
area.
Okay.
You mean the empty vacant,
yes,
okay.
correct. Councilmember Lucarelli?
I think that the legend is just a little confusing in that the orange-red, clay color, says severe distress or non-metropolitan, but then the yellow is just the eligible area, but it's also including the clay-colored area, correct?
It's their criteria, it's eligible, but we can't make as a compelling case, as Councilmember Ashby says, part of that tract isn't even in the city.
Right.
It isn't part of our mixed-use or zoning pilot project. So we're really focusing on the red zone, which is our downtown.
Right, well, but it includes so much more than the downtown, and I would just have a little concern about some of the historic neighborhoods that are actually within that area. So we can separate those out or no?
Not in our application, but there wouldn't be a need for development.
Okay, I'm just kind of,
Just to comment on what I hear is Cindy's question, is that we don't have the zoning in those other areas within that census tract that would allow for the type of investment that this would
Correct,
incentivize.
that's right.
I
'Cause
just want to make sure.
it's designed for a development project,
Correct.
which we have other tools in place for downtown that we're trying to revitalize downtown.
I understand that, I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that these neighborhoods are protected.
Yeah.
This is just a federal census tract.
I
and-
get it.
And that's their criteria, so
I
we have to
totally get
accept
that.
that. Yeah, Councilmember Cachardi?
Yes, go ahead and make a motion to, I move to direct the mayor to petition the Downtown Department of Commerce, to prioritize the inclusion of the census tract covering downtown Port Orchard in the Opportunity Zone program and to participate in the program.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Diener. For further discussion or questions?
I have a question, but Nick, I don't know if you can answer it. I'll ask it anyway. When it's talking about its opportunity zone and investors defer paying their capital gains and investing in the area, are those investors in the census tract then have to reinvest the capital gains they save in the same census tract? Or could people who save money in one county invest it in another county? Do you know?
What's that? Yeah, I don't think the rules are out yet on that.
Okay.
We only learned about
we
this
don't-
on Wednesday, and we have about as much information as on the website. But we know that we have about a 1.5-week window here to get a letter into Commerce.
And really, what I believe is happening here is these dollars can come from anywhere in the country. It's somebody with a federal tax liability is able to take, what I'm gathering from this, we've got the new market tax credits. This is kind of the Trump administered twist on that. And it's kind of a hybrid between a 1031 exchange, if you're familiar with those, and new market tax credits. And it's the Trump administration's form of an economic stimulus package. When it was it was tied to the tax changes that were recently, and so this has come on very quickly, and it's been handed down to Commerce, each state's Department of Commerce to administer, and our State Department of Commerce, I don't think was even expecting this. They haven't made an application available. They just know that they have to select 25% of the eligible census tracts in the next few weeks.
So what I'm hearing is you either get on the list to be one of the 25%, or you're not. And if you're on the list, then an investor would look at that list and see what their opportunities were in our city. And
They
they
could.
would look at all the counties in the state.
Correct. And just because we ask to be added, doesn't mean
Right.
we still have to, Commerce is ultimately gonna make that decision. So I'm meeting with Congressman Kilmer on Thursday, and I'm getting a letter from him in support, and trying to get letters of support from KEDA and other governmental agencies. Yes.
I was just gonna say, this is, totally separate from, as Nick said, our tax abatement program that we did last year. It's separate from the incentive programs we've got going on downtown. And to your point, there could be historical redevelopment, right? And that same benefit from a capital gains perspective could apply. So if somebody had an old house they wanted to refurbish, or it doesn't have to be a 5-story, multi-use, mixed-use, retail component, this stands on its own. And so I think it could also encourage redevelopment of some of those other areas, that might be run down or a little bit dilapidated, and have that same benefit extend to those people wishing to invest and redevelop some of those areas within that boundary. So I think it's beyond just new development in a commercial-based, initiative. I think it could extend beyond that. And we'll see as the rulings come out and the more definition comes
Now,
out.
thank
but
you,
think it's
because I was
broader-based.
thinking commercial, but it obviously
Any-
could be
Any
residential.
redevelopment,
Right.
someone's house, they might redevelop their house and be able to take advantage of, like, the 1031 exchange.
And unlike the tax abatement, there doesn't seem to be any hit on the local taxes. Nothing locally is being deferred.
It's federal.
So no state or county taxes are affected. So there doesn't seem to be a downside.
Nor is there income to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just a conduit.
Right.
Well, there could be income to us, as they
Well,
redevelop and
indirectly.
they
Yeah.
incur
Oh, when
sales
they-
tax, and
right.
sure, the
Right.
redevelopment could spur.
Right.
Increase property taxes.
Yes. Desirability to locate.
Clear as mud.
More to come.
More to come. Right. I hope there's more to come.
Must
So
be.
with that, you'll be voting on a motion directing the mayor to pursue the Opportunity Zone program. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll get to work. Okay, the next item is a discussion item, Vision 2040 scoping notice and comment period. Mr. Bond, it's your show tonight.
Yeah, this is a continuation of a item from our work study meeting last week, and when we concluded that discussion, the council was going to go home and kind of digest this, reread Vision 2040, and think about the growth strategy that we are seeking, so that the public understands what is happening. PSRC has sent a scoping notice related to the update of Vision 2040, which is our regional growth strategy for the 4-county region. And if you remember our 2016 comprehensive plan update, the main thing that came from Vision 2040 that we had to deal with was our share of the region's growth, which ended up being planning for a minimum of 8,235 people and a little over 3,100 jobs. And so when Vision 2050 is updated, they're now saying that between 2020 and 2050, they're expecting 1.8 million additional people in the 4-county region, and they're trying to figure out whether they should stay the course and continue the trajectory that we are on with Vision 2040, or whether we should look at other alternatives. And this is really an opportunity to comment on what those other alternatives should look like. And so I had drafted a very rough framework that could be used as the basis of a letter. And I wanted to see sort of what from that letter resonated with council, and whether you did in fact want to comment on this, and I assume that we'll still talk about this at the Land Use Committee or possibly Economic Development, because the letter is due on the 19th of March, which is before our next work study meeting. So we have this council meeting and the first council meeting in March to discuss this, and then potentially we can work on it with some committees in terms of putting together our comments. So with that said, I'll turn it over to council to share any thoughts that you might have, and if you want to express a preference for whether we should comment on this.
I think the other piece of this is giving Beck and I some direction, because we have before our next council meeting, have a KRCC meeting that we need to sit at and hopefully be on the same page. I think we are. And, you know, and if you've got further direction you want to give us so that, you know, our city has a united position. So with that, comments from you guys about,
When you say same page, you mean as the rest of the KRCC?
meaning, I don't know that that'll ever happen.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to clarify.
Beck and I are on the same page.
Okay, all right.
As representing this body.
I have, go ahead.
Well, I'll start, because I just have some general comments. I was impressed by a lot of the themes that Nick presented in this, and the one that I thought was most intriguing was the fiscal sustainability, because so much of our growth is predicated on our roads will be paid by the development fees, which we know may not always be a spigot that's there. So I thought that was a nice concept. A minor formatting suggestion is if we could have a one-page version of this that people can glance at and just see the ideas and then read more deeper if they're interested.
Maybe an executive summary,
Yeah.
prefacing.
I mean, 5 pages is kind of long for some people.
Not for PSRC.
Intended to be
Well,
a-
not those people, but maybe.
Yeah, but this is intended to be a document that's embedded in the 2050 visioning. Present all of our ideas, unless there's stuff in there you don't want presented.
Are you suggesting sort of a summary of what the 5 pages?
I thought the 5 pages were a summary.
Okay,
There.
well,
Have-
I'm so glad I'm not on that committee.
I guess things I want to say is a conversation I had with Nick yesterday, and if Nick would please correct me when I say something. But this original scoping is for the Puget Sound Regional Coordinating Council to do a SEPA review, or environmental impact statement on this, okay? And when I hear that, I think environment. But basically, it's not just the physical environment, it's also the human environment, such as affordable housing or health issues. And so when they look at the alternatives, they will take each alternative through a SEPA process and see how it will actually impact the totality of the enviirment. Because I was thinking just so kind of narrow into just physical environment, and it's much larger than that. I think it is important that Port Orchard submit a letter. And I think our letter, I think we can also sign on a letter that the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council may draft. But I think it's important for us to have our own letter, because we may have more details or additional information that the other jurisdictions aren't inclined to sign on to. I think it's important for us as a council to think how we would like Port Orchard to grow in the future. And one of the things that I would like to include in our letter that I believe Nick has in here is right now with Vision 2040, there are small cities, and that's what we're classified as. And basically, Vision 2040 has us growing at 8% of the allocation to Kitsap. Then there's a large city, there's a metro city, there are core cities. And we're right between a small city and a large city. So I would like to ask PSRC to review the structure of their cities, however they do that, because do we want to move to a large city from being the small city that we are? And if that's the case, then we're going to be allocated something like 14% of the population. So we need to kind of decide how we see Port Orchard moving forward. And so, you know, or do we want to ask them to increase the population for a small city, you know, and take it out further? Right now, I think a large city starts at about 22,500, or 22,500, and maybe we want them to take that up to 30,000 or 40,000. I mean, there are just some things like that that I think could help us, because we're talking about how we are going to grow. So I think that's important. I also think it's important that we ask Puget Sound Regional Coordinating Council to recognize the uniqueness of the 4 counties that are involved in the region. I think because we are a peninsula, we have unique needs, and I think that so does King County, that goes, you know, all the way to the mountains. I mean, and I think the uniqueness I think they just can't put us all in the bucket and think we all look alike. I think it kind of has to be normalized for all of us. Those were my major concerns right now. When you read 2040, there are some action items in there that I'm not sure how well PSRC did on completing those action items, because they talk in here about having developing concurrency programs that are normalized, and I don't think they've done that. Normal level of service, and I'm not sure they've done that. They also have some housing issues in here and some design things they were supposed to have done, and I don't know that they really did those things. And I'm not sure how we find that out, but I would also like to see them give us perhaps a summary of what they think the successes were out of Vision 2040, because the successes should be built upon. And then what were some of the shortcomings, because we would want to do those differently or have different, you know, policies in place to take care of some of the shortcomings. So anyway, that was my thought.
Councilmember Cacciardi?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that we all are looking to the future, and long-range planning is important, but at the same time, you know, we start thinking of 2040 and 2050, it's a long time out there, right? And at the rate that we are changing as a society, I think, you know, if I could have kind of a global from 50,000 feet, would be to provide for flexibility, especially as it comes to local control. Things are going to change so quickly. We're not going to be able to accurately predict. I mean, who knows with, you know, the AI that's coming at us, how we're going to be driving cars, how transportation is going to look 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And so I think to protect our flexibility at the local control level with issues related to UGAs, with issues related to zoning, you know, things of the nature, because, you know, we don't know what things are going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And so before just kind of giving this up on the front end, I think, you know, it's great to be cognizant of it, but I can't imagine going back 32 years to 1986 and having this exercise for the year, you know, 2018, and things we would have maybe hit upon that were good and things that we missed. And so I think the ability for us, local control, to have flexibility and to protect Port Orchard and what we want our community to look like as we progress into the future.
I want to say one more thing, and that is, there seems to be, I don't want to say confusion, but people look at the Vision 2040, it's just a
Title.
It's just a title.
Title.
It's a plan of what may happen, but there are people that almost make it a regulatory document, and that is not acceptable. It's not a regulatory document.
Right.
It's simply a guide.
Right.
And everyone needs to understand that piece.
Councilmember Diener?
So I think what I've heard tonight are all good comments. Beck, with your comments about what do we want to be? Do we want to be a small city? Do we want to retain that size, or do we want to look at being something bigger? It's important, I think, to get that question answered first. Because if we go with something bigger, we're going to be beholden to those and to those targets. And if we don't meet that, that's going to cost us. And we're already having challenges with infrastructure, and I don't need to sing those blues. But I think that's really important to get out of the way and help drive this letter, which I think for the most part was done really well. So
I think we did hit on that, and PSRC needs to either raise that threshold or, I'm not sure. You're right, we don't want those higher percentages because we're challenged to meet our infrastructure needs that we have.
I would have to be sold that it would be wise to move up to the next size city if there was a
Along those same
classification.
lines, right now, Paulsbo and Port Orchard are the two small cities. Bainbridge is the only large city. If we become a large city, then we're splitting the growth with Bainbridge, who at the present time is very resistant to additional population and growth, and so we could end up even with more than 50% of the share of that, depending on the politics of Bainbridge versus the politics of Paulsbo, who is maybe a little bit more pro-growth. So that's another consideration as you kind of figure out which direction you want to go.
Difference there too is they've annexed their entire island and have their entire UGA. The penalty to us is we don't meet our targets and our urban growth area gets shrank.
And I don't think Paulsbo's increased their UGA in quite some time, at
Right,
least
they've
10
annexed
years.
most of it though. There isn't
No,
hardly
and
anything.
we've talked about this before. I think that's a great strategy to try to just raise that little bit, that lid a little bit to, keep us as a small city, but yet not have us seemingly be bumping up against that in the near future. Again, to provide for that flexibility.
Councilmember Lucarelli?
Well, I strongly support having the population go up a little bit, bump that up, and not be called a large city. I can't imagine that, and I can't imagine the population having to build the infrastructure for that way out into the future like that, for the population currently or even into the near future to shoulder that burden would be irrational. So,
And I'll just add that we're going to continue to see pressure in our rural areas. I mean, there's still a lot of undeveloped lots out there, and we will feel that. People will be channeling through here, especially if we see more fast ferries come on the horizon.
They'll be driving right down the new Tremont Street though.
Going, ooh, ah.
But when you say that, that is something else we need to look at, and that is the corridors that connect some of our transportations, because when the fast ferry gets into Southworth, think of the pressure on Sedgwick. And development, I would expect development to go all the way down Sedgwick. Although I realize most of it's in the county, and that's probably not possible. But that's where I would see as a region, we would want to direct growth is on the transportation corridors.
So I'm not hearing, yes.
No, I'll weigh in my 2 cents.
Yes, go ahead.
So, I actually found it kind of very disturbing. Not the memo. I thought the memo was really good. What scared the heck out of me was half the growth of 1.8 mil in the area actually comes in a 10-year period, which I think will really stress what happens to our city. I mean, because we're gonna have to increase our density, and it's a plan. It's, you're right, it's not regulatory at all.
Right.
But, what that does to environmental concerns, and I know you mentioned that, that's only one leg of the stool. But that's one of the things that makes our city unique, between the marina and also everything that's going on, stressing it. So, yeah, I think we need to weigh in. I think we need to weigh in strongly and be a player in it, not sit on the sidelines.
Yep.
But it's concerning.
So I haven't heard any dissenting opinions, so as we're not ready to send this letter today, but I think this is pretty much the language we're looking at and the message that Beck and I will
Yeah,
weigh
the other
in
thing
on.
that I really want to stress, and Councilman Rosa Pepe reminded me of it when he mentioned our marina in Sinclair Inlet. Whatever Vision 2050 does, it has to protect Puget Sound.
I had also provided some earlier comments about the Lamlards and the feasibility of having those incorporate, and I'd be willing to help, perhaps work with staff on messaging that.
Is that a county position though, or does that come forward in a city's position?
Well, so
How
those-
is that the city's, I'm not positive how I see it as a city's.
I'm not sure that some of what's put in this letter can be doable with Lamlards.
Okay.
So I just don't want to, I guess I want to make sure that we're representing that well enough, because I'm not sure that by court cases and Growth Management Hearing Board decisions that you can expand Lamlards. So you might be locked in with what we've got, at least historically speaking.
Gotcha.
So when you
Okay.
look at Suquamish
that is a city
and
position.
Manchester, they're not going to be able to incorporate.
Interesting.
Just one last thing, I think, Councilmember Diener, working with you, I think, to draft something in advance of the land use meeting, which I believe is on the 12th now at 11 o'clock, or is it the 5th?
Fifth.
Oh, it's the 5th, okay.
It's Monday.
I've got it in 2 places on my calendar now, so. So if we can draft something between now and the 5th, that would be great. And the last point I would make is that regional growth that is coming, the 1.8 million, is only $1 million of that is in addition to what we're already planning for in our document. So if you were.
Only a million.
Only $1 million.
Only 60%.
If you were to project what we had to plan for in this last 20-year planning period, realistically, it's probably another 4,000 people under the existing growth strategy versus an alternative growth strategy. And our buildable lands report, when we prepared that, showed that we had surplus capacity as it is. So we've already accommodated, under the no action alternative where we just kind of stay the course, we've already accommodated 50% of what we're likely to be allocated without lifting a finger to upzone anything. And so realistically, it would be finding a way to get 2,000 more units of housing into the existing boundary, give or take. I mean, just in rough numbers, but that's kind of the size of the challenge based on the no action alternative.
Yes, sir.
So I had one other question. If there was kind of an underlying theme here, I felt that there could be a little bit of banging between the county and the city. And I didn't know if that was too strong or needed to be defined a little bit more.
Sure, yeah, I think, I included some data because this, the PSRC has been giving presentations on this and showing how we're complying with our current growth strategy. And I think one of the takeaways is that certain cities in the region, and then I think in general, all of the counties, with the exception of maybe King, have been exceeding their rural growth targets, and cities like Gig Harbor have already shot past their 20-year growth target before their comp plan was even adopted. And so in terms of bringing the growth trend into conformance with the plan and what steps are needed to make that happen, I think it's unrealistic to ask Gig Harbor to stop growing for the next 20 years so that they can fit our plan. But I also, I think that there's probably barriers in some jurisdictions that are preventing growth from occurring where we've identified that growth to go. And I think that there's probably things that some jurisdictions are doing that, are throwing gasoline on a fire when it comes to growing much faster than the region had asked that area to grow. And so I think there's room to bend the trend a little bit. And Councilmember Ashby mentioned the concurrency issue that is part of the regional framework, and I think, PSRC administers transportation dollars. It's not a regulation, but it's consensual coercion by saying that we're going to agree to grow in this way, and if you adopt plans that achieve that strategy, you're going to be able to get grant money to implement that strategy. And so perhaps PSRC needs to take a position in the regional growth strategy that says we need to all get on the same page as far as transportation and make sure that some jurisdictions aren't artificially encouraging development by having lax transportation standards, while others are repelling growth because they're so strict. And if we have a level playing field, then maybe the growth strategy would work a little bit better. And so that's kind of, I think, if you talk about the position of the counties and the cities, I think that's a strong theme in the draft that I put together.
So land use will take this up again Monday. Beck and I will be at KRCC on Tuesday. And we're gonna bring this back again as a discussion item, or from land use, are you gonna be able to draft that letter?
I think we should bring it back again. I think we should
Yeah.
vet it as much
Okay.
as we can before the
Okay,
19th.
so you'll fine tune this letter at land use, and then probably bring it back for an approval or some sort of an approval from the council to send the letter? Is that what the?
At our-
Yeah, on the 13th.
On the 13th, okay, that's the plan. All right, we'll move on to our next item, 7G, which, this is the next step on the 640 Bay Street process. I said that Brandy and I reached out to 4 brokers to get a broker's price opinion. Only 2 responded. It's a little busy, I understand, out in the real estate world. And one of the 2 is really a residential broker, so I didn't feel that they were qualified to do the work that we were discussing. The other broker, I think everybody knows him, Gary Anderson, and he's very qualified to do the work. He was reluctant from a time standpoint because I can't even probably look at it for 2 weeks. So he said, but we would get it done in 30 days for us for a price of $1,000, which I think was fair. We'd be looking at $3,000 to $5,000 for an appraisal and probably a 6 to 8 week turnaround time. And we're valuing a piece of raw land. So how we're gonna value this is the land and then the right-of-way and then combined. And I don't think we should be surprised if the combined value is actually potentially less, because our right-of-way has a sewer main that goes through it that the developer would have to move over underneath the stairwell, would they not, Mark? It's a water line, sorry, it's a water line, so,
They'd have to move, did you say under a stairwell?
well, it's in the part of the right-of-way right now.
Where they're proposing
Where
the
the
stairwell.
building would go, if
Right.
if we vacated the street, and it would need to get moved over and put underneath the pedestrian plaza we're talking about and stairs. So, the broker will talk to Public Works about those types of things too, so, don't, it's one of those cases where 1 + 1 might not equal 2. Because there's some liability to acquiring that property and moving, public.
What if the cost to move the water line is so high that,
We need to know,
combined
we need to
values.
know that now versus vacating that street and then moving forward, at this point,
interesting, okay.
So, and maybe they would need to change their scope, but that's just one of the things that, as we've, peeled the layers off the onion that,
Were they aware of that water?
I'm not sure of that or not. So, but I know Public Works is, and I am now.
Is the hill climb gonna be ADA? Do you know? Does it need to be?
It would have to be.
Okay. 'Cause
The
it
hill climb
wasn't-
itself wouldn't be.
You have to provide an equal experience, so there has to be access to the gathering area, and how that's provided, I think,
But the stairs
would have to be
themselves-
Seen
designed.
in the rendition, and I know that was very high level, but
Yeah,
I'd
they're
wonder-
concepts.
Yeah,
yeah.
interior access.
Yeah,
With the elevator.
yeah. So that's for the developer to have to work out the details on, but yes, sir.
I don't know if this needs to be said or not, but I assume that Gary is not part of the investment group.
He is not.
Okay,
He is not.
just wanted to ask.
Yep, wasn't listed, so, anyway, I don't need any formal action, I just said I would bring it back and let you know because it's within our procurement policies and the level that I can engage him, so I just wanted to make you aware, and it's gonna take a little longer than we thought, about a month before we'll have that report back, so we'll get on it tomorrow. This 7H is the retreat, and this is just a discussion. I passed something out, and I'm sorry for the public, we still don't have our TVs working, but they will be by the next meeting. So, a few of you have mentioned, in the past, we've talked about doing some strategic planning, and it was at the end of the meeting, and that topic seems to vary from person to person, what that means. And so, and I'm not gonna lead that piece. I want the professional facilitator to lead it. So my what I'm struggling with is what is the outcome or the results you're trying to get from that? So, Councilmember Ashby.
Yeah, the results I would like from that piece is a unified vision for Port Orchard. Because every decision we make should all come from the same base, from the same foundation. What is our vision, and is the decision we're making supporting that vision, rather than making independent decisions. So that's the piece I want, is a unified vision for how we see Port Orchard in the future.
So perhaps strategic planning is not really the right description of what we're trying to do. That would obviously come later, but I agree.
So it's a visioning,
Visioning.
it's a visioning exercise.
Yes.
Okay, so that's, I just want to have Sophie make that time
Yeah.
meaningful for you guys. And so we're going to do that first in the day, is what was asked of me.
And my notes that I had just wrote down is we need to know where we're going in order to create an efficient plan to get there. And we would need an overreaching, and then below that, we would work on sub-area plans. I mean, that was kind of where my mind went. Yeah,
Could you email that to me?
I'll do better than that.
And hand it to me and then-
Wow, old school.
All right. Thank you.
You're gonna have that scanned?
I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. I can read her handwriting. It's better than mine.
Just real quick.
Yes.
We have a date of 19th, and I thought it was the 18th. 19th
Friday.
is Saturday.
It's the 18th.
It's the 18th.
It is the 18th. And I have reserved the banquet room in Puerto Vallarta, similar to last year. And so, as you can see, what I'm planning on here is that first hour and a half, Sophie will lead a visioning exercise. And from there, Finance Committee asked me to look 1 to 3 years out on what we believe the staffing needs of the city are going to be. So I've been working on a document that I'll present to the council there. And then I gave 15 minutes to each one of the directors to just kind of talk about what's going on in their department. And I've actually got the judge and the police chief coming, and they've never attended a retreat before, so I'm looking forward to that. And from there, I've got we have a monthly project meeting that we have that I have with staff, and I'll just present to you. So you've seen this document, you've seen it before. It's constantly evolving, and before we start planning for more projects, I want it fresh in everybody's mind. All the things we're working on and all the things that we've committed to doing before we start the last exercise of the day, which is priorities for the next biennial budget that starts in 2019. So, yes, sir.
You've got 30 minutes for that, and maybe just because I'm the new kid on the block, I could see that going a little bit longer. I mean, is that not? I assume that 30 minutes is just an idea. It could go longer.
It could go longer, and
that would be okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
It's your day.
Yep.
So I was going to try to keep it at a high level, but if you need to ask questions about those projects, that's what that time's for. So there's what was it, 32 projects on the list?
It's 34 now.
34, and 33 of them are marks.
Oh, no.
So I don't want anybody to take this in any disrespectful manner, but having sat through numerous vision statement processes, the most recent being the SR16 Technical Advisory Group coming up with a vision statement that took us 8 hours to come up with the vision statement. I would suggest that you give yourself plenty of time, but limit it as well so that you've got this, and then staff could join you.
Yeah, I'm not expecting staff other than the clerk to be
For
there.
the vision.
She's got to suffer with us because she's the keeper of records.
Because I think, quite honestly, I think you'll be more free thinking without having staff rolling their eyes.
So, well taken, Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you.
That was my plan, is that it would be the council and I and the clerk and the facilitator there for an hour and a half, and we'll be firm on that 10:30 time, to take a break, and then you guys will join us, and then we'll start those next discussions that do involve staff input.
Right.
Mr. Diener?
So I also agree that visioning is the way to go and to start that process. And in an hour and a half, that may go really fast, so we might have to pick it up. But also Sudbury plans. I think also that it would be good once annually to look at our outreach efforts and how that is working. I'd like to begin the discussion about 1% for arts or something similar. I know that it's an intensive program to get up and running, but
I think that's the 1:30 discussions, and because if we're gonna fund, if it takes dollars,
right.
we gotta, and I totally support that idea, but where do the dollars come from? That's.
Sure.
And
So I'm just throwing out ideas right now. It's more to populate people's minds. But also something that I've talked about in the past is we've got Appendix A of our comp plan, which has 7 pages of goals and policies, and many of them are called out as high priorities. And I think we should be revisiting that document annually to see how that drives our priorities. So a comp plan review, I think, is always in good order. And I think annually we should look at that. There are a lot of high priority projects here.
That could help with the vision.
Would that make sense to potentially pull that document into the work study preceding the
it would. Yeah. Which would be we've got a work study that,
20th.
is there a work study
May or April?
in May just ahead of that, or is it just after it?
Oh,
It is
15th.
the 15th, so that makes sense to have it.
Yeah. And you've heard me say it, the most transparent way to see what the city is doing or wants to do is to look at this document, and we should be living by it.
Okay. All right. I have an idea of what we're doing, and I'll get with Sophie tomorrow, and we've got a conference call already planned. We added business item 7I, which is the engineering tech position, and that was, didn't follow through on that. We talked about that at length at the work study, and if anybody needs to see it, I provided it to Councilmember Lucarelli this evening, because she wasn't at the work study, but the impact to the general fund this year was about $15,000 or $16,000 this year, and then we would need to fund that position ongoing thereafter. The impact to the other funds are fee-based, based on development activity. While it's being paid for out of the sewer fund or the water fund or the stormwater fund, those are review fees and this is an estimate, of course. But based on the current activity level out there, we should have little problem meeting those levels to fund that. So with that, if somebody would consider making a motion, Mr. Facciardi.
Mayor, I would make a motion to authorize the creation of an engineering tech 2, understanding the fiscal impacts as presented.
Okay.
Second?
There's a motion and a second. And further discussion of this position? Yes, sir.
I think that Councilmember Clausen put it succinctly last time, that, basically, it's a great recommendation from the mayor, and that we should move forward with it. It's well needed at this point in time. So I know John's not here right now, but I think that carried a lot of weight.
Thank you. Appreciate your support. So with that, you'd be voting on the approval of engineering tech 2 position, which is an increase to staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. One other point here in the consent agenda, Mr. Crocker, that ILA is not funded in the budget, that item 4C. So you'll need to pick up that $10,200 in the future budget amendment too. It was in the consent agenda. Saw that earlier. Council committees. Finance Committee did not meet last Friday, and Mr. Clausen isn't here, so I think the next meeting, I think you'll probably meet the last Thursday or Friday of the month is kind of how you've been meeting, so. But when Mr. Clausen gets back, so your position was approved, Mr. Dorsey.
More projects.
So. Okay. So we're at Economic Development and Tourism? Not personally?
You're still here.
Didn't leave in cuffs.
The next Economic Development Tourism meeting will be March 12th, which is the second Monday of the month, here in council chambers at 9:30.
Okay. We have utilities.
Yes, we'll be meeting March 19th, 9:30 a.m. here at City Hall, also a Monday. Sewer Advisory, that will be April 18th, 6:30, and that's at the sewer building.
Land use is March 5th, first Monday of the month at 9:30 at DCD.
Which is I know some of the folks here, the Puppy Mill item is on that agenda, and so it's not in this building, it's in the building just down the street here, for the Department of Community Development, so. And lodging tax, have not met. Chess Festival Chimes and Lights, I know they're still working on Garland.
We are, actually. I'm sure we'll be hearing something soon. But we didn't have a meeting this month that was canceled, and we will be having our next meeting March 19th, 3:30 here at City Hall.
Okay, and we talked about the council retreat. Outside agencies, Councilmember Ashby's been beating me up, and rightly so, that add that item on there, so.
Yep.
The outside agencies, so you have anything to report from
Well, I will
KRCC?
just say that KRCC, Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, is working right now on the transportation funding cycle, getting the criteria ready for calling of the projects. So we're working a lot on transportation funding right now. And then the other thing we're working on is the scoping of the Vision 2040. So both of those things will be on our agenda next Monday, or Tuesday, March 6th, yeah.
And when is the deadline for those applications for the funding?
They haven't been set yet. I believe PSRC sent out a regional project. Did they do that today? Yesterday?
They sent out the official, putting out the application process for the region.
Right, there are two separate application processes. One is regional money. You compete with jurisdictions throughout all 4 counties, and Kitsap County is allowed 6 applications in that. And then the county-wide is just jurisdictions just within Kitsap County. And that call for projects won't be probably until about April.
Right. That's when they're due, isn't it?
Right.
Probably April 1st, so.
Right.
We're,
The goal for KRCC is to approve the county-wides at our first meeting in June. So the process would be done by then.
so where I'm going with that is we don't intend to apply for any of the regional money. We don't have any projects ready for any construction dollars, but we most likely will make an application for the multimodal dollars and planning for, we'll call it Bay Street Path West, so from the ferry terminal to the boulevard, and planning dollars though, because planning dollars won't have a time clock ticking on them like the design or right-of-way dollars do, so.
I was also thinking about applying for planning dollars for Port Orchard Boulevard, because we know that we're gonna have to deal with the SR 166 barrier-free issue at some point. I wouldn't mind getting out ahead of that replacement of the 18 culverts and kind of conceptualize a complete street for Port Orchard Boulevard. And we know we have to upgrade the sewer lines. We have to take those 18 crossings down to 2 or 3 barrier-free. So I'd like to, and roundabouts at the top and the bottom. I think I might, just from planning dollars on that as well. And it could be an extension of the pathway, then pedestrianized up the hill up to Tremont. So I think I'll apply for that as well.
Are we thinking about planning dollars for Bethel?
We talked about that initially, but Nick says that our corridor study will get us to that level. We
Yeah.
don't need, we won't need
Okay,
KRCC's money from a planning standpoint.
okay.
Our next, realistically, and that's one of my items that, on the project list is, picking that project up. We're not gonna do that whole corridor like we did Tremont, is this body's gonna need, give us some direction. Once we have that, that corridor study, to pick that project and what is it, and take some of our local dollars and impact fee dollars and to start and do that design, so that the next funding cycle, we've got some plans on the shelf that we're competing for construction dollars. Mr. Diener?
So, are you done with your update? So I attended the Growth Management Policy Board meeting on February 1 as the alternative to Michael Scott from Bainbridge Island. And they really talked about updating the regional centers framework, and you could see quite clearly that the alliances with Snohomish and King County seem to be outweighing the alliances that Kitsap and its cities and Pierce County may have. And so that there were about 10 amendments that were proposed, and all but one failed. So if anybody's interested in the details of that, let me know. There are some minutes that are available for that.
Okay. Any other outside agency reports?
Highlights for us on Kitsap Transit.
We're in the midst, you saw the newspaper article here recently about the study for, relating to, oh my goodness. The service, yeah, the service improvements that'll come from the $1.5 million in additional funding that we have. And the consultant's been just about done with it. We're on a similar path to our corridor studies. Consultant's about done with that report. They had a check-in with us at our last work study, and kind of 3 different paths, and Sunday service probably even matter of fact, I can tell you, isn't, because of the cost to ramp up the ADA service, it's about $500,000. We get more bang for our buck if we make the service more frequent and extend the hours with the goal of putting more riders on the bus and getting more fare revenue, which then enables us to add more service beyond that. So, and we awarded the contract for the next two fast ferries. The MV Finest is in transit through the Panama Canal, I believe. Should arrive here in the next month or so, and then it goes to a shipyard to be refurbished. And the 2 new boats for the Bremerton-Seattle service, the contract was awarded for those. The first one will arrive about January of next year, and the second one about 3 months later. So we'll have that much-needed backup boat about a year from now. So that's what I have for Kitsap Transit. So on to my mayor's report. We talked at length about the pavement management system and paving projects, and staff had made a recommendation that we were going to move forward with paving Hortsman. Then we went and checked in with West Sound Utility, which is the utility provider in that area, and we know that there's a large sewer main in that street, and they don't have the replacement of that in their current budget. So the last thing we want to do is pave that street and then have them come along and tear it up. So we're now moving on to our second prioritized project, which is the city limits on Sydney Road heading north. So it's starting at the county line towards Sedgwick. So it's a similar amount of blacktop, shorter but wider. So next to Albertsons, out there at Sedgwick and Sydney on Sydney Road. So that's what, and ideally, if it works, the county, we believe, is going to pave from the county line out. And in the perfect world, they'll do all the procurement, and we'll enter into some sort of an ILA, and one contractor will do all of it. But the perfect world never seems to come. So we'll see how it fares. But that's the project we're looking at. We have some significant projects out for bid right now. If all holds true, this Friday we'll open the bids on McCormick Village Park. We'll open the bids on the 9 treatment system, and Bay Street Pathway Segment 3 is out for bid right now, and we'll open that on March 26th. So, lots of projects. And that's it for the mayor's report. Report of department heads, Mr. Dorsey?
Yeah, so basically what you had just mentioned, and also we're still in the process on the Annapolis Creek. We selected Reed Middleton, and we're now in the scope budget negotiation phase. And we did select RH2 for the Marina Pump Station, and we'll start to develop scope on that. And last question I have is, Clancy Donlin is not here tonight, and somebody left Subway sandwiches out front, so I'd like a hand raise at who brought that, so that we know that, so that I know that they're not tainted, and I can.
Don't know anything about them?
Did they just show up? Because I know the Marine Corps opened up
Are they
a letter
Subway or Jimmy
apparently, and it
John's?
made people sick. So
Subway?
yeah, there's like Subway sandwiches out there.
I don't know.
Nobody?
Okay.
Okay, well I'll be the guinea pig then.
We'll watch you eat.
We'll watch you eat them, and if you survive, the canary. you're
canary.
The canary. All right. Noah?
I don't have anything further tonight, thank you.
Okay. Nick?
Nothing tonight.
Sharon?
I do have one item. As you'll recall, I believe it was in the October work study session, we discussed the small cell ordinance, and the city council authorized Mike Bradley, who is a Lighthouse attorney, to draft an ordinance. That was, initial draft was delivered earlier this month. Nick has been working with Mike Bradley to fine tune it. It will be going to committee, and then I think you can expect to see it at the April work study session.
Okay, wonderful. Brandy?
I have good news for you guys. When I checked our recording system, our recording tape for the retreat, and you guys can go for 23 hours.
Oh.
What a relief.
Okay, 23
We'll
hours.
have you stay 23 hours to make sure that that's an accurate statement. Report back the next day.
All right. With that, we're to our second citizen comment period. So when you come to the microphone, if you could identify yourself and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Mayor, council members, thank you for letting us speak tonight. I'm speaking in favor of the retail pet sales ban. My name is Carolyn Zimmers. I'm a retired veterinarian. I've practiced emergency medicine in Kitsap County for over 20 years and a total of 30 years with my other practice. I've had a lot of experience treating sick puppies and kittens from breeding farms, commonly referred to as puppy or kitten mills. Most of these sick pets came from one notorious pet store that has been in business longer than I was practicing medicine, and they are still doing it. And that is well known, that it was well known by my peers, my fellow veterinarians. Everyone here probably already knows about how inhumane these breeding farms are. The puppies are often sick due to lack of ventilation, proper nutrition, stress, lack of veterinary care, inbreeding, filthy conditions. The breeding bitches have it worse because they are doomed to live out their lives producing litter after litter under the same horrible conditions, but will never be lucky enough to be adopted. They will suffer until they can no longer produce a litter, and then they will be killed or left to die. So the other side of things you already know about. I want to tell you about the other side of the story and what happens when a family purchases one of these sick kittens or puppies. Picture this: I walk into my exam room and see a small child hugging a sick puppy and crying because she's worried about her new best friend. The family just purchased this pet a few hours ago, but the little girl and the puppy have already bonded for life. The parents are worried about the sick puppy and their crying child, but they are also concerned about how much this is going to cost. After getting the puppy out of the little girl's arms, it's soon apparent how very sick the puppy is. After a couple tests and a history involving purchase from a pet store, a diagnosis, a determined and treatment plan developed. The family is lucky if the illness is minor, like intestinal parasites and lice or diarrhea or stress. Most people who purchase a puppy do not factor in cost of medical care beyond routine vaccines and spays or neuters, or anything more than routine health needs. Sometimes more can send families into emotional and financial crisis. So if the diagnosis is parvo or distemper or an untreatable genetic disorder, or the family decides to max out their credit cards, or the family decides to use next month's rent to pay for medical care, the family is now in a financial and emotional crisis they may not get out of easily. I saw this scenario many times during my professional career. It is devastating to the family, particularly the children in the family, and it affects the veterinary health team as well. The suicide rate for veterinarians is one of the highest in any profession, and it is stresses like this that can push someone over the edge. It is a lose-lose situation for everyone except the callous owners of the breeding farms or the unethical owners of the pet store. And be very sure that the owners of the pet store know exactly where their merchandise is coming from, and they value profits over stopping suffering. What about guarantees and warranties, you might ask? Well, I asked that question, and it is not something that probably anyone in this room who loves their furry family would accept. The guarantees usually involve surrendering the sick pet in return for another pet from the same store, as if you could treat that sick pet like a defective pair of shoes with no emotional involvement. They do not guarantee the pet is healthy at time of purchase, and they do not guarantee to pay medical expenses if the pet gets sick. I can tell you that most people will not take advantage of this offer because they know that the sick little kitten or puppy that they have already bonded with will not get treatment and will either die a slow death in the back room or be put out of its misery in who knows what manner. Please shut down sales of puppies and kittens in pet stores unless they are from a humane organization like the Humane Society. And I highly recommend adopting and not shopping. Older pets make very good companions too.
Thank you for your comments. So just be mindful of the red light. That's when the 3 minutes are up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Margie Moore, and I do have new information. I just wanted to thank you for some of the thoughtful questions that you had last time in regards to this issue. And speaking to what our kind doctor mentioned is that I do have a handout. Every year, the Humane Society of the United States publishes the Horrible 100 puppy mill list, and the puppy mill supplier of the pet store that the doctor was referring to is on here. And so what I do have are the facts of the operation and copies of inspection reports from the USDA that outline the issues showing, you know, this is a mega mill, 1,000 animals on site is their normal inventory. And so it's just information for you to have in order to make informed decisions. And then there's a documentary that I find incredibly informative. It speaks to the question that you were asking Councilmember Ashby about, you know, why are we doing this at the grassroots level as opposed to the state level or federal level? And it talks about the successes and failures that they've had in trying, and so that we have found that doing it at the grassroots in the community level is works a lot better. It's a lot less politicized if we do it that way. So I do have these for you. I'm sorry, I don't know what the protocol is for
I would
bringing
just
these.
maybe hand them to the clerk,
Okay.
and she would have those.
I've only got 3 copies of the DVD, but there's should be plenty of copies of the handout that I excerpted for there. So thank you again for your time.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Others wishing to comment?
Hi, I'm Karen Money, and I've been advocating to ban the retail sale of puppies throughout our county for about 7 years. This ban would not negatively affect responsible or local breeders. It would not affect any current pet stores in Port Orchard. It would not affect the public's ability to have adorable, healthy, humanely raised puppies. Fortunately, Port Orchard currently only has pet stores operating humanely, and we'd like to keep it that way. By enacting this ban before you have a store selling milled dogs, you'd be taking the humane stand against puppy mills, as well as protecting your citizens from the emotional and financial expense that the doctor was describing. The reality is pet stores don't have the option of obtaining dogs from responsible breeders because responsible breeders don't sell puppies to pet stores. One of the most common provisions in almost all National Breed Club's Code of Ethics is breeders must agree never to sell their puppies to pet stores. Responsible breeders understand how horrible the puppy mill industry is for dogs and consumers. They want to maintain breed standards and better the breeds. And responsible breeders want their breeding dogs healthy and happy for their lifetime. The largest and most successful pet store chains in the country don't sell puppies. And as you know, this ban has already been passed unanimously in Bremerton, Bainbridge, and Paulsbo. Our own Washington State Legislature has noted the legislature finds that dogs are neither a commercial crop nor commodity and should not be indiscriminately or irresponsibly mass-produced. But of course, puppies sold from puppy mills are the definition of a commercial crop and are indiscriminately and irresponsibly mass-produced, and those are the puppies sold in pet stores. Additionally, I believe Port Orchard already contracts out to KHS for animal welfare issues, and KHS will do whatever it takes to help enforce this law if it ever became an issue in Port Orchard, so it doesn't add any cost to Port Orchard's budget. I feel it's a clear choice for the local government to ban the retail sale of puppies to protect its citizens and to close the animal welfare loophole that allows the puppy millers to worm their way into our communities. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Others wishing to comment this evening?
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Ruin, and I'll try and be very quick. I could talk to you for, how many hours did you say was that thing? I could talk to you forever about animals. I just ask that you consider adopting this and looking beyond just that it's another law or another piece of legislation that you're going to have. I was a police officer for 31 years and retired about 6 years ago. I left that job, and I then began to work with a nonprofit organization as a cruelty investigator for about a year under a grant. And the things that I saw and the stories that I got, that in some cases you could prove and some you couldn't, are absolutely horrendous what these animals go through. There's a place in Missouri, and what happens nationwide is when these dogs, these female dogs, bitches, become non-productive or don't produce puppies at a high enough rate, they ship them off to this warehouse. And there they bundle them, and they try and bundle one good dog that might be able to squeeze another litter out of her with a couple of dogs that are clearly spent. They take whatever they can get for them, 10 bucks, 20 bucks, 30 bucks. They sell them to whoever will buy them. Who knows what happens to them after that? I don't think they're being adopted because it's this warehouse that's known for doing this. It's just awful, and that's how they dispose of them in general in our country. When they get puppies, kittens that maybe aren't perfect, aren't great, they abandon them, they drown them, they suffocate them. I worked on one case where when the puppies weren't good enough, they put them in a freezer and froze them. I mean, it's just horrible what these people do in the name of making a nickel off of an animal's uterus. And so I ask you, if there's not a big problem in the city, which there's not, that you take action now before it becomes a problem, because we're zooming in on it, and there's fewer and fewer and fewer places for these people to sell their animals. And so don't let you guys be the last one, because I guarantee you that these people will come here. They need to sell those dogs somewhere, those cats, so please don't be the last place, because they'll be in your backyard. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Others wishing to comment? Okay. Thank you. And anything for the good of the order? Okay. Hearing none, the meeting's adjourned.